Thank you for all for coming tonight. As the winter season starts, I just kind of felt that it would be important for us to kind of get some things out. The poor nurses and athletic staff and medical staff have been taxed during the fall season with, inundated with lots of questions. So we thought, in an effort to be proactive, we would supply some of that information. And then again, some of the protocols that we need to have in place for a safe season. For those of you who went through the fall season and enjoyed the fall season, which I think many of our parents and athletes did, know that the winter is going to be different. It's going to be similar in some aspects to last year because of the indoor piece. Unfortunately, Kim or myself do not make the rules. We kind of just are the ones that have to deal with the rules and enforce the rules and make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to do on our end. So that if you've come off a fall season, know that the winter is. I'm going to just put that out there right now. In terms of masks is the big one. But certainly there are some other little things that we need to know besides that. So I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I figured I'll get it right out there, right out in front, so that way everybody knows where we stand.
Rob, I think you're on mute. Sorry.
Kim, you muted me. Was I boring everybody already? It's only the first slide.
I'm sorry. I don't know. Maybe I clicked something. Sorry.
I do like to just remind everybody that what we are dealing with. Again, I do feel that, as a whole, we're in a much better place than we were obviously this time last year, or certainly the time that we did winter sports, which, as you remember, was in the late winter as opposed to starting in November. So we are in a better place in terms of the idea that we're going to try and get a whole season in. We're going to play complete schedules. We're going to travel a little more than we did outside of our immediate region. But some of the other things that we didn't get to, that we got to do last year, are going to stay in place. So just quickly here, COVID obviously, is contagious and infectious disease. And we as the district are trying to mitigate that as much as possible and minimize the risk of exposure to our student athletes and to our community and our visitors at this point, because we will have an opportunity for visitors. So the nurse is going to take over some of these slides, especially the medical ones, because again, she's at the forefront of these on a daily basis. So she'll kind of join in with me and she'll start to talk about these individual slides. So obviously testing positive for COVID-19, isolation, medical clearance, and return to play are all going to be things that we're discussing. Sorry, Kim. If you'd like to take over, Kim, go ahead.
Yes, hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Just wanted to touch on a few things related to COVID and testing positive and some, quarantine things that we're going to be going through. This is as the guidance is right now. Of course, things are consistently changing, but this is what we know. So just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. For anyone who tests positive for COVID-19, the guidelines right now is that you must isolate for 10 days from the onset of the symptoms and be fever-free for 24 hours before returning to school. This is nothing new. We just ask that even if the 10 days of isolation is over, if they're not 100%, they should remain out until they're symptom-free, especially fever-free. A medical clearance, this is the big thing. This is the kind of the big change for, a lot of us the last year or two, is that any athlete that tests positive for COVID needs a medical clearance from their doctor. This is separate from their annual physical. I could certainly give anybody details if you are going through this for what's needed for the medical clearance. It is not necessarily a cardiac clearance, but it does comment on the fact that there's a normal cardiovascular exam. There's a very small chance that the virus could affect the heart, but this is something really big now in the sports world, seeing high school and collegiate athletes that they need a medical clearance before returning to play. and they'll work with our athletic trainer at that point once they are cleared to make sure that they return to play slowly and appropriately. Once again, this is once a student is medically cleared, the clearance note will come to me, and the athletic trainer will be made aware, and then a plan for return to play will be initiated.
So if I could just add to that, it's, you know, the thing that we want to maintain is our student safety first and foremost. So I know that kids will come with their note and be expecting to play full-fledged the next day or that afternoon or whatever the case may be. But we have protocols in place on how we're going to return them to play so that they're doing it in the safest way possible. For those of you who know maybe the concussion protocols, again, kids are cleared by their doctors, and it takes several days for a kid to get back on the court after having a concussion. It's a similar kind of idea, that taking time to make sure that they are able to kind of build up to speed in terms of their heart rate and in terms of just, you know, getting back into acclimated after being what could be in bed for 10 days, you know, or just laying around the house for 10 days. So we want to make sure that it's done in the safest way possible. So we're just putting this information out there because, again, we've had parents say, but I got to know, why can't he play tomorrow? And that's just not how it's going to operate at this point in time. Again, because there's some unknowns and because we want to be overly cautious to make sure that we don't make any bumps in the road that we don't necessarily need to make. So please bear with us if your child is one of those that test positive, that these are the things that will have to happen. And Kim, certainly will guide you through that process as it happens.
And one other thing I just wanted to add, I think a question came in, I just saw it pop up on the chat. If a student has had COVID in the last 6 months, our directives from our medical director, Dr. Casero, is to obtain that medical clearance. If a student has had COVID longer than 6 months ago, the medical clearance isn't indicated, but we really trust the parents to let us know if they've been having any kind of issues, any kind of negative sequelae since they've had the virus, any endurance issues, all those things would definitely need to be reported to us. But, you know, someone who had COVID, say at the very beginning, a year and a half ago, does not necessarily need the medical clearance. He's asked to get clearance for anyone who's had COVID in the last 6 months. Okay.
So that's a perfect segue to this slide right here. And it's steps to mitigate exposure to COVID-19. And there are several stakeholders, parents, you being one of them that Kim just mentioned, that we're only as good as the information that we get. So and again, I hate to say this, but we've had parents withhold information only to find out in a short amount of time that there was actually a COVID exposure, a COVID case at some point in the last several months. And again, it's not, I know that you want your kids to play, but just think about the long-term health, and as we are, to make sure that they're safe. Okay, so it's going to take all of us, as you can see listed on this slide, to make sure that everybody has a safe and positive experience during the course of the season. Our coaches have taken the NFHS course for COVID-19, again, just so that they understand what they're dealing with on a daily basis. We ask that they're going to wear their masks daily, that they have handheld whistles that we've purchased. We'll help disinfect equipment. We have supplies to do that. Hand sanitizer will be available in and out of the gyms as they have been all year. And then we're going to ask that they're practicing social distancing when applicable, and they're talking to our student athletes on the court. YHS athletes, we're going to ask that they bring the following: practice gear, obviously cleaned daily, labeled water bottles, and of course the mask that we spoke about early on. Athletes will practice social distancing. We'll ask coaches to have them do it, but you should be mindful of that as well. To stay away when you can from your teammates. But I understand there'll be times where you have to be together, obviously on a court and so on. So, but we want to, when we have opportunity to social distance, we want to try and do that as often as possible. we wash, hand sanitize, all of that kind of good stuff that we've been doing, that we're asking kids to do during school day. I think that's important to maintain that after school hours. COVID doesn't magically disappear at 3:00 or 2:30, whenever the school day ends. And then, the gym all of a sudden becomes magically COVID free, and everybody is magically free. We know that it's still going to be there, and we want to still continue to have good practices. Mask protocol is the big one. I'm going to tell you right now, the athletic directors had a very, very heated discussion this afternoon about masks and having kids follow them, and interrupting games to make sure kids have their masks on. Suspending coaches quite possibly was something that somebody threw out there. If teams are not following the protocols. So, I'm all for it. Our teams did a great job last year overall. I didn't think we were perfect, but I thought we were pretty darn near perfect at times. But so I'm okay with that, because I know that our coaches are all over this. But some of the teams that we did play were not as on top of it as I would have liked, for sure. And the word competitive advantage was thrown around a lot. So, nobody wants to play a team where they have competitive advantage over your team. You want the playing field to be. So we want to make sure that we're doing our part to do that. Masks are required, as I said, for all athletes. Ear loops, the ones that we see kids wearing every day, which is perfectly great. Everyone must bring their own mask, plus an extra one to meetings, practices, home and away games. If for some reason you don't have a mask, or you've misplaced the mask, or you've lost the mask, whatever the case may be, we do have additional masks here in my office, which, for those of you who might not know, is now 10 feet away from the gym. So I have a stock of masks here, and a stock elsewhere that if I need to replenish, we can do that as well. So if for some reason you're here and you don't have one, please stop in and we'll make sure we get you one. The coaches will also have extras available to them. So to give it as well, if you're going to an away game, they'll have it in their med kits and so on. Again, masks will be worn indoors everywhere. Nothing changes from your school day. Sports medicine at YHS. So athletic trainer, we have 2 students at a time will be allowed in the athletic training facility. Anyone entering the facility will be required to wear a mask. Again, that's for your safety and for the athletic trainer's safety, who also is going to see multiple kids throughout the course of a day. Athletes will enter through the main hallway entrance and exit through the weight room back into the hallway, so that we have no cross contamination. It's just moving in and out in a different way so that you're not crossing paths. They'll sign into the designated spot, which all of you at this point should know, except for maybe our freshmen that are online, but everybody else probably has an idea about that. You'll continue to do those. Athletes waiting for the athletic trainer will practice social distancing within the hallway, okay, while you wait to get to see Justin. Kim, you want to hop on this one?
Sure. So this is basically what we are doing right now as far as our illness and sick day protocol. And this is probably one of the important slides, the most important slides really, coming out of the health office. My contact information is there. Probably most of you have it. It's kcortese@yorktown.org. You can email me, call me in the office. I'm there every day till 2:20 at least. Basically, we really want people to be honest. I am well aware, I have a high schooler myself. I'm well aware that everyone wants to come to school, not miss any classes, not get backed up on their work. We really do ask that if students are experiencing symptoms, that they stay home. It's really important. Student athletes should not attend school if they're experiencing any COVID symptoms. I think we all kind of know what they are. Students should be symptom-free for 24 hours before returning. If a student experiences any symptom for longer than 24 hours, they must be cleared by their physician prior to returning to school and sports. Now, this is kind of variable. I mean, I don't need everyone to go get a COVID test, but really and truly, if it's something that lasts longer than 24 hours and it's not improving with, say, cold medication or allergy medication, then you really do need to go to see the doctor and have them, rule out everything else. Maybe do a strep test, maybe see if it's sinusitis, maybe do a COVID test. We ask if a COVID test is done, that they do the PCR. A lot of people don't want to wait around for the PCRs, but trust me when I tell you they're not taking 7 days like they used to. Caremount Urgent Care is doing them. Rapid PCRs, you can get the results back the same day. So we really do ask that you investigate any symptoms and not continue to send students to school with symptoms. We've had, cases where everyone thinks it's a cold, and a lot of people have colds this time of year. But for the one that doesn't come out as a cold, it really causes a lot of disruption and a lot of, unnecessary quarantining and things, a lot of, time and investigation to figure out, what could have been prevented. If the COVID test is done, the results must be received before returning to school and sports. This is also really big. That PCR test, no matter how long it takes, you have to remain home until the results come back. I have plenty of kids that say that they got tested and that they don't know what the results are, but they're in school. So please keep that in mind. The other most important thing is that if anyone in your house is sick and getting a COVID test, not for travel, not for their job, if someone really is feeling ill and a COVID test has been done, we ask that the student remain out of school. If they, we'll talk about vaccines and stuff, but especially if they're not vaccinated, they really do need to remain out of school until that PCR test comes back on the person, that the student is living with. So if someone in your home is ruling out being positive, we ask that you, just be cautious and just be honest with us. You can give me a call anytime.
So if I could just add into that, Kim, we've had this happen. Those last 2 points there on this slide, we've had happen where a kid, I sent my son to get a test or my daughter to get a test, and I didn't think they really had COVID, and I sent them to school, and now we find out that they did have COVID, and now they've exposed several kids, in some instances more than several kids. And now those kids are all exposed, or a team has been exposed, and now they're shut down for 10 days. So again, I know that everybody wants their kids to, they don't want to miss a practice. They don't want to miss a game, whatever the case may be. I understand that. But if you look at the big picture and they actually are sick, they're going to miss those games anyway. It'll just be at a later date. And now will have caused several other people to miss their games and their practices. And most importantly, what we forget here is their classroom time in school. So I that's on there for a reason, because it has happened, and it hasn't just happened once, it happened multiple times. And it leaves me scratching my head a little bit that we weren't a little more cautious. So please keep that in mind as you are making decisions on how your kids are feeling and how your family members are feeling. Kim, you want to go?
Yes, just one thing that came up on the chat just now is about Zoom and the ability to work remotely while you're out. So really what it is very different year than last year. And unfortunately, unless you were on a Department of Health mandated quarantine, there is no remote option. That's something that has come out of administration. Lots of people have asked, but unless you are, exposed and deemed to be a close contact and on a Department of Health quarantine, there is no remote option. But the teachers, we go through this every day. They're more than understanding. There's options to still log into the Google Classroom. They can, post work, get work. We still expect that they stay up, to date with their academics, but the logging in and getting a link to live stream or to, work remotely is only for those in quarantine or isolation that actually have COVID. So I hope that clears that up. So COVID exposure and quarantine, basically this is what we really need you guys to do is parenting students should contact their coach. That's the first thing. Athletic trainer, school nurse, athletic director, if any of us are not available, if there has been a suspected COVID-19 exposure. For immediate removal from the school and athletic participation will be necessary. So this is really for a student who, is known to be a close contact, either someone in their home or someone very close to them that for sure there was close contact. We'll go over what exactly a close contact means. But for anyone who is a close contact, we would ask that you, remove the student from school and, investigate if there's any symptoms and then follow the, testing protocol or the quarantine protocol, depending on, case by case. And I go through this, Thank God, not as much as last year, but very often. And I could certainly talk through any case individually with anybody. We count days, we think of exposure, and we really work it all out together. So it's the system that we have works well. We just ask that you give us the information as quickly as you have it. So here's the deal for unvaccinated, individuals and vaccinated individuals. For unvaccinated individuals, well, let's start with the definition of fully vaccinated. Definition of fully vaccinated means you've had both shots and you're 2 weeks removed from the second shot. So if you've had only one shot or you've had 2 shots and you're only 5 days post, whenever that exposure is, if it's not at least 2 weeks from that second vaccine, you are not considered fully immunized, and the unvaccinated rules would apply to that student. So basically, for unvaccinated individuals, the Department of Health mandated quarantine would be put in place, and it's 10 days right now. And this is right now what the directives that we're following. I know that there's some information out there, CDC and the DOH has put out different, testing out options and all these other things that, districts can, adopt at some point. But we are right at this moment not making any changes. And as soon as we do, you will know. But it's a mandated 10-day quarantine for unvaccinated individuals. The day 0 would be the date of the last possible exposure to that infected individual. And we do recommend a PCR test about 5 days after that exposure or sooner if the student develops symptoms. So a PCR test is not required to come back after that 10 days. We never require a test. We do recommend it, being that if that individual that's on quarantine ends up testing positive halfway through that quarantine, we would know, and that quarantine would have to be extended now for the 10 days, the isolation for the infected person. But right now it's a 10-day quarantine for unvaccinated individuals, and a PCR test is recommended at some point during that quarantine. For fully vaccinated individuals, again, that's the 2 shots plus the 2 weeks, they would not have to quarantine under certain circumstances. Well, under these circumstances, we need to have the vaccine information. It's really important, and I think there's a whole slide on this. If your child is fully vaccinated, we ask that you send us that vaccine information as soon as you can. Having the vaccine information ahead of time would really avoid unnecessary quarantines. We can update our records. I can run a report. I can see who's vaccinated and not. It just for you guys to, have that say, registered with the state. It really does not, transfer to our system. We really need a copy of those vaccine cards. So if you have them, just send them on over. If you haven't sent them already, I'll be happy to enter them into our system. For vaccinated individuals, they would not have to quarantine, but a PCR test is recommended on day 5 after the exposure. Again, if symptoms develop, they should be tested sooner. We don't actually require this test also, but we have seen fully vaccinated individuals that were exposed carry on normal activity, return to school, and then halfway through develop symptoms and their PCRs end up positive. It's happening more than, you think that it happens, but we have heard of it. So keep in mind that the fully vaccinated, individuals would not have to quarantine, but we do ask that you get them a PCR test about 5 days after that last possible exposure. Something else that's really important, our medical director has asked that we emphasize the use of mask wearing. So this kind of goes without saying in school, but we run into an issue when a vaccinated individual that's been exposed is sort of at lunch and takes off the mask to go eat with friends. If that person ends up testing positive at some point, anybody that they exposed without their mask would have to quarantine. So it's sort of hard now, the weather's getting colder, but we do have tables outside, the students can eat lunch, or we do ask that they distance themselves from friends in the cafeteria if possible, just so to avoid having close contacts without their mask. The mask really should be worn at all times while indoors during that exposure period. Next. I think I touched on this before. The one real important thing with positive test results is that we, the same rules do apply from long ago, where if you've had a documented positive COVID test, then you would not have to quarantine for 90 days. So anybody who has tested positive in the last 90 days from the time of the exposure would not need to quarantine. So we would treat them sort of like the vaccinated individual. There is no antibody test or anything that we can do for getting out of quarantine. It's really just a positive test result in the last 90 days from the exposure and fully vaccinated plus 2 weeks. Those are the exemptions. Everybody else would have to quarantine. I'm sorry, my dog is behind me.
Sorry, Kim, if I could just add to that, right? It's they have to provide that information to you, right? So I know that we've had people say I'm vaccinated only to find out that they had only one of 2 shots, or they were 2 and not plus 2 weeks. So it's up to them to provide us that information so that way we can get them back to school as quickly as possible, right? Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, that's true. And you may get a letter, sometimes we'll hear about a case on like a Sunday afternoon, and our, I work with Mr. Gallis, one of our assistant principals, and he will immediately just send out letters to say that people are quarantining based on the roster that, Mr. Barrett gives me. And everything is case by case. We present everything to the Department of Health, and they honestly make the decisions as far as athletics as to what happens. But if you do get a letter and it says that your child has to quarantine, even if you sent me the vaccine information, just reach out and let me know, oh, just a reminder, my kid's vaccinated. I don't think, they're eligible for quarantine. Please verify. And it's just a simple verification, and then you'll be off the quarantine list. But, some people will end up on a list or get a letter. It's just that we're just trying to prevent 20 kids coming into school on a Monday morning that don't need to be there. It's harder than to send everybody home, and we're just trying to, get ahead of the game.
So just a little bit about competition. So spectators will be limited to a maximum of 250 people per contest. That number right now is being talked about still. It's not written in stone. And at this point in time, some schools are taking a stronger approach to that, meaning they're allowing only 2 per athlete, similar to what we did last year at some points with different sports. And others are doing a 250, and then others are open. So we're kind of collecting that information right now, and we're kind of figuring out that exact number. So 250 has been the most consistent number. It's the only reason why I put it there, so that way we had something to work with. But before our season starts, we'll definitely have a concrete number in terms of what other, and also an understanding of what other schools are doing that we may be visiting, or what other schools are doing that might be visiting us. So the one thing that is consistent, the spectators are required to sit 3 feet apart unless in a family cluster. So mom and dad obviously could sit together with their daughter or son who might be there to watch their daughter or son play basketball, for instance, or wrestle, or whatever the case may be. Home and away seating will be identified. Just to give you a little bit what we did with volleyball, we had home bleachers on the far side away from the teams, and then we put JV teams behind the bleachers, in the bleachers behind our home teams, and we did the same with visiting teams. I would suspect that it'll be a little bit the same, but we're trying to keep everybody away from our kids in some aspect, just so there's less exposure to them. Masks are required by all spectators. Because the gym is new, we are not allowing food and water in the gym. So we want to make sure that that you're going to no food or water in the gym, except for our athletes that'll have it on the sideline. But we will require masks throughout the entire time. Additionally to that, if you are uncomfortable coming to the gym, we just had our huddle live stream capabilities hooked up this past week, and we'll start to put out that information as we get closer. So if you want to watch it from live stream at home, you'll be able to do that. If you're not comfortable, or you have family members that are not comfortable, or maybe immunocompromised, you'll be able to share that link with them, and they'll be able to watch the games as well. Again, the big push here is masks with spectators, with athletes, coaches, athletic directors, medical personnel, referees. Everybody will hopefully be doing their part with the masks. Contact tracing.
So I think actually there was a question in the chat. Hopefully this slide answers that. If there's a known exposure at school or athletics, contact tracing will be used to identify anybody who's maybe considered a close contact. So a close contact is defined as anybody who is within 6 feet of the infected person for greater than 15 minutes in a cumulative 24-hour period. So that could be 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 5 minutes later. Anything that adds up to 15 minutes in a 24-hour time period. And if you're closer than 6 feet. The difference, from this year to last year is really the masks. So I'm sure you guys have seen, some of the literature that Dr. Hatter has sent out and talked about in some of his meetings. But, if everybody has a mask on, then only the person that has COVID has to quarantine. If people don't have masks on, then anybody that was within 6 feet of that person for greater than 15 minutes in that 24 hours would be required to quarantine. So really the mask is the key. Anytime we have anybody who's been exposed, the way that I do the contact tracing is I ask the student if anybody was around them closer than 6 feet without their mask on. So it's in the cafeteria, it's in the carpool, it's on the bus. I've watched some videos on the bus. The kids pull down their masks a lot. I mean, it really is, the mask is the key. So if you want to avoid an unnecessary quarantine, have your child wear the mask as much as they can. The Department of Health, as I mentioned before, determines if quarantines are necessary based on the information that Mr. Barrett or Dr. Hatter will provide. So we've had exposures, a football player, say, or a volleyball player that's in the back row on the side that doesn't get in contact with everybody, or a student maybe that was sitting out on a game that was with 2 other students on a bench. I mean, every single case that we've had is really dissected and closely, thought out, and all the information is presented to the Department of Health contacts that we have, and a determination by them is made. So we not always, we don't always know what the outcome is going to be. Sometimes we have to wait to hear what it is, and we don't always understand their decisions, but it's their decision. They're the governing body, so we really just have to give them the information. I think that's it for that slide.
All set, Kim.
I think I talked about this enough, but again, if your child has been fully vaccinated and received the 2 doses and it's been 2 weeks, we really do encourage you to share the vaccine information with the health office. I know several students have told me that they have their cards in their wallets, or they think that the Department of Health shares that information with us. They have all these nice apps and stuff. We don't have access to any of that. You really do need to provide us with the information. And again, having that information is just helpful to avoid an unnecessary quarantine. If you get one of those letters that say you have to quarantine and you can't come into school on a Monday morning, I could certainly verify that vaccine information and you'll be back into school Monday morning instead of midday Monday or even on Tuesday. So we do ask that you provide us that information if you have it.
I think that might be it, Kim.
Yeah.
All right. So at this point in time, I'll take any questions that may come up in terms of general stuff. If you have something specific to your child or your sport, I would just ask that you wait until we allow other people to just get off so that they don't have to sit through those questions. But if you have a general question in terms of protocols, vaccinations, those types of things, by all means, either put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and I will be happy to answer. So somebody said, did you collect vaccine cards in the fall? We have not made a concerted effort to collect vaccines. If people want to share that information, again, it just speeds up. Am I correct in saying that, Kim? It just speeds up them getting off the list of quarantine if there's a possible quarantine. So we're not making a concerted effort. We're not even telling you have to share that information. We're just telling you that if you do, then you could possibly be taken off a quarantine list if we have it ahead of time.
Yep, that's correct.
Can you let us know exactly what we need to do in order to get a medical clearance for a past COVID diagnosis? So Kim, you want to take that?
Yes, I would be happy to answer those questions. If it's something individual, you can certainly call me in the office tomorrow, but just a quick synopsis of just kind of how this all came about. The American Academy of Pediatrics kind of guides what we do as far as medical clearance goes. And what their recommendations are basically is based on symptoms. So how they define what the medical clearance needs to entail is if you are mildly symptomatic or asymptomatic, all you need is a doctor's note. The doctor's note just needs to say that you have a normal cardiovascular exam and you're cleared for sports without any restrictions. So I don't know if anyone needs to write that down, but it needs to say that the student has a normal cardiovascular exam and is cleared to participate in sports without any restrictions. Now, knowing that they have a normal cardiovascular exam, they're going to need to be seen by their doctor. So they probably just need to be seen. They'll listen to their heart and lungs. They'll ask all sorts of questions. And most doctors' offices now have a nice little check off. At the beginning, we were kind of making our own sheets and things communicating with the doctors, but they kind of all know what we're expecting, and they'll do it for you. If your child was moderately symptomatic, like really had fever for a lot of days, was really ill, down and out for the whole 10 days, then we would ask that your doctor, use their discretion as to the level of clearance that's needed. If the doctor knows that you were really ill, and they're not going to want to just write off that note that says that you're cleared, they may want you to go see cardiology or pulmonology and further investigate some things that might be going on. So that really is the doctor's discretion. And if you were really, really sick or in the hospital, and there is any kind of long-term effects from your COVID, we would ask that you see a cardiologist and get a full cardiac clearance. We've had pediatricians recommend a full cardiac clearance and have students go and they just do an EKG. Sometimes they do blood work and they do the whole thing. It's not always necessary, but it's a nice thorough clearance. It really is to your doctor's discretion. But if a child just runs its course through a couple of days, is mildly symptomatic, sort of fluish or cold symptoms, then all we need is a medical note that indicates that they're free from symptoms, that they have a normal cardiovascular exam, and then participate in their sports without any restrictions. But I'd be happy to answer any individual question. You can call me anytime to talk about that.
So another question that is really for the sports that tend to go off campus, which is bowling, hockey, skiing. I don't know if there's any others that I'm missing, but it says outdoor contests such as Bear Mountain or Eversole, any different requirements. So right now we're collecting that information. Some things we already know, some things we're still finding out. But for example, the big one right now is the Armory. For those of you in the track and field world, the Armory is located in Manhattan. So it falls under the mayor's orders for New York City. They are requiring that all athletes, and I hope that you know this already, I know the coaches have been putting it out there, but they require that all athletes are vaccinated to be able to participate in athletics, in track and field meets in that facility. So if you are a track and field member or hope to be a track and field member and you are not vaccinated, know that that's one place that you will not be able to go. That doesn't mean that we won't have alternatives. We're trying to figure out what that group looks like, but we are planning to do something similar as we did last year with some outdoor track and field meets, and we're also looking to see what RCC in Rockland is going to do as well. In terms of Brewster Ice Arena, I'm hearing masks, and I'm hearing that they're allowing spectators. That's what I'm hearing. Again, we'll get the final word on that hopefully in the next week or so before we actually start contests, and we'll be able to share that information as it comes in. So every facility, again, is ever changing. Some are more open right now. If things start to change, they know that they can change drastically as well with that. So I would, I would just take that into note, make note of that about how you would like to proceed. I think we answered this. What is considered an exposure? So right, I think we're good with that one. Will students be home for precautionary reasons, siblings sick, getting tested, et cetera, be able to Zoom into their class? I think you answered that, Kim, right? Yes?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
I think you're up to the last question. Will spectators be allowed at the swim meets?
Yes, we allowed spectators, certainly at our home swim meets. The sectionals that were held at Clarkstown North, or whatever their pool name is there, they limited the number of spectators that day to masks and some tournaments. So I'll give you, for example, our wrestling tournament. We probably won't allow outside spectators other than Yorktown spectators. So we did that for our volleyball tournament in the fall here, where we only allowed Yorktown spectators. And then for the final match, if there was a finals, we allowed the visiting team in for the final. So we just try to cut down, again, number of exposures throughout the day for it. And that's become a little bit of standard practice. So for you, for those of you who are going to wrestling, know that some of the schools that may do something similar, where they're not allowing visiting spectators, only allowing home spectators, and then maybe for the finals or semifinals and finals, everybody's kind of doing their own little thing, a little bit different, depending on gym size and all sorts of other factors. So just know that we'll get that information out to you as quickly as we know it, so that you can know if you're going to be watching it via live stream or you're going to be able to go in person. But our home dual meets for wrestling, basketball games, those types of things, yes, we'll be allowing spectators. Again, fully masked throughout. Can you go to the New York City Armory with the first vaccine dose? No, you need to be fully vaccinated, is my understanding. I'll have to double check that, but I think you had to be fully vaccinated at this point. I'll let the coach know the answer to that. They also have it on their website, just if you need it sooner than that, but I'll find out and give it to Coach Smith.
I think there was one question earlier that I had written down about how, I think that the question read about does having COVID, does it matter if you're vaccinated or not? And I don't know if I'm answering this correctly, but basically if you test positive for COVID, it doesn't matter if you're vaccinated or not, the protocol still applies. And the medical clearance still applies. So you do still have to do the 10 days of isolation, and you are required to do the medical clearance, regardless if you're vaccinated or not.
I have a question about cheer tryouts, but it's just in general, all tryouts start on Monday. Probably tomorrow, Friday, we'll have the exact times. Our coaches are sending our times and locations that they would like to practice. We'll get it up onto our calendar in time for you to see it this weekend, but we will have tryouts starting on Monday.
One thing just about registrations, thank you for all your patience. I have been making my way through the 300 registrations that are currently in Family ID for winter. If your status still remains not approved, you can check that just by logging in and seeing if your status is just in a completed state or if it says approved or not approved. If you're not approved, please reach out to me. It's probably that we need updated medical documentation. If you've sent it, just reach out, remind me that you sent it. I'm getting like loads and loads of emails, so I may have missed it, but rule of thumb just for sports physicals is that the physical has to be valid within the year of the start of the season. So, and those are the guidelines that we're following this year. So any physical dated after November 1st of 2020, so within a year of this month, that's considered valid for the season, and we can use that for your winter registration. So if you have not provided us with an updated physical that was done the last year, that's why registration is not approved, then please reach out to your physicians and send us a copy if your status is at this moment not approved.
Kim, there's just one here. I'm assuming that fully vaccinated means the first 2 doses and not a booster. I'm assuming that's 2.
Yes, we're not at you. I mean, the booster, again, you can send us that information if you have it, if you'd like to, but no, we are not. There's nothing, there's no negative consequence of not getting a booster or, any positive advantage to having it as far as like any documentation goes. So if you have it, you can send it, but fully vaccinated just means the 2 shots plus the 2 weeks.
For those of you asking hockey questions, just reach out to Mrs. Epstein if you're in the middle school for modified hockey, and she'll tell you how to register. You should, Kim, am I correct in saying this? When they're approved on Family ID, they get an email. Is that correct?
Yes, but you can go on and just log into your registration and you'll see whether the status says completed, approved, or not approved. There's a way when you log in, you can go to the registration and it'll show you what the status is. If you see that it's you can see it's either going to say completed, which means you did the registration and it hasn't been reviewed yet, but they're all at this point should have been reviewed, or approved or not approved. And if there's any questions about individual registrations, please call us in the office tomorrow. Myself or my assistant could look at them individually.
Okay, I think we answered all the questions that are pretty general questions. If you have specific questions that you want to ask me, I'm going to let everybody else go at this point.